Kevin needs 100 grand for his future. That's where our focus is. It's time you thought of family, Sarah.
Finally, some recognition. You erased me before dessert.
$8 million, all to Sarah Miller.
This is absurd.
There must be a mistake to her.
No mistake. Finally, my turn.
Sign it. 10% is generous. The rest belongs with us.
Think of Kevin's future, honey.
We all know you
You can't handle this alone. You don't get to... You're tearing this family apart!
You will hand it over now!
I need that money, Sarah! You abandoned me once. This time, I abandon you.
Ungrateful brat, you will regret this.
How could you do this to us? Sarah, please, just fix it for me. The only thing I am fixing is my freedom.
I'm Sarah, 28 years old, and in my family, there are two roles, the problem maker and the problem solver. You can probably guess which one I am. After years of grinding, paying off my own student loans while my brother got a free ride, and finally landing a massive promotion at work, this was supposed to be my moment. The moment my family finally saw me as more than just reliable. But at what was supposed to be my celebration dinner, my dad looked right past me, straight at my 30-year-old unemployed brother, and announced, "Kevin, we need to get you a down payment for a house, at least 100 grand to get you started." 100 grand. The number just hung in the air, completely erasing me. But they had no idea about the secret my aunt had just left me, a secret worth over $18 million. And they definitely weren't ready for the plan it inspired. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, because you are going to want to see how an $18 million secret turned the tables for good. After that dinner, something inside me shifted. The dull ache of disappointment I'd lived with my whole life began to sharpen into something else. Something colder. More focused. My family saw me as their dependable, quiet workhorse, the one who would just absorb the unfairness and keep going. Fine. If a workhorse was what they wanted, then a workhorse was what they would get. But I wouldn't be working for their approval anymore. I'd be working for my own escape. At the office, I wasn't the overlooked daughter or the forgotten sister. I was Sarah Miller, the senior marketing strategist who could turn a failing campaign into a case study for Harvard Business School. While Kevin was busy trying to become a day trader with my parents' money, I was in the boardroom, commanding the attention of executives twice my age. I lived on coffee and deadlines, fueled by a deep, burning need to build something that was entirely mine, something they couldn't touch, couldn't belittle, couldn't give away to my brother. My boss, a sharp man named Mr. Davison, started noticing. He saw the extra hours I put in, the way I anticipated market shifts before they happened. He saw the fire in my eyes that my own father refused to acknowledge. One Friday evening, as I was the last one left in the office, he stopped by my desk. He didn't say much. Just, "Miller, your proposal for the European expansion, it's brilliant. We're greenlighting it, and you're leading it." I just nodded, a quiet "thank you" passing my lips. But inside, a small victory drum was beating. I poured everything into that project. My weekends became a blur of international calls and market analysis. My friends stopped inviting me out, assuming I'd be busy. They were right. I was busy building my fortress, brick by painful brick. The project was a massive success, exceeding all projections by nearly 40%. The bonus I received that year was more money than I had ever seen in my life, a number so large it felt unreal. I didn't tell my family. When my mom asked how work was, I just said, "It's fine, keeping busy." To them, I was still just Sarah, the one with the stable job. They had no idea I'd just tucked away a sum of money that could have bought Kevin 10 of his precious Mustangs. That was my first secret. The first brick in my wall. Then came the call that changed everything. It wasn't from my parents or my brother. It was from a quiet, dignified man named Arthur Vance, my Aunt Carol's lawyer. His voice was somber. Aunt Carol was gone. A sudden heart attack. Of all my family members, Aunt Carol was the only one who ever truly saw me. She was like my dad's polar opposite: sharp, self-made, and fiercely independent. She never had kids of her own, and she never sugarcoated her opinions. While my parents were celebrating Kevin for passing a single college class, Aunt Carol would call me and ask about my stock portfolio. She'd send me books on business strategy, not gossip magazines. The funeral was a quiet affair in her small town in Connecticut. My parents and Kevin came, of course, putting on a grand show of grief. My father even gave a eulogy, talking about a deep sibling bond that I knew for a fact had never existed. It was sickening. A week later, Mr. Vance called again, requesting our presence for the reading of the will. My family was buzzing. Carol was always fond of Kevin, my mother whispered to my father, loud enough for me to hear. Maybe she left him something to get his business idea off the ground. They saw her death as another potential lottery ticket for their golden boy. We sat in Mr. Vance's mahogany-paneled office, the air thick with anticipation. He was a man who radiated quiet authority, his eyes missing nothing. He opened the will and began to read. There were some small bequests to her favorite charities. Then he looked up, over the top of his glasses, first at my parents, then at Kevin, and finally his gaze settled on me. As for the remainder of my estate, he said, his voice clear and steady, including the full ownership of Hughes Home Collections, valued at approximately $12 million, all stocks and investment portfolios, totaling roughly $3 million, and the primary residence at 347 Lakeview Drive, with an estimated value of $3 million. I leave it all, in its entirety, to my beloved niece, Sarah Miller. Silence. Complete, deafening silence. My brain couldn't process the numbers. 12 million. 3 million. Another 3 million. 18 million dollars. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at my family. My mother's jaw was slack. My father's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. And Kevin? He just looked like a child whose favorite toy had just been given to someone else. My dad was the first to speak, his voice a strained croak. There must be some mistake. 18 million? To her? The disdain in his voice was so thick I could have choked on it. They thought she had left me the house and a little savings. A quaint little inheritance for the responsible niece. They had no concept of the empire my aunt had built. They had no idea of the power she had just placed in my hands. This wasn't just money. It wasn't just a house. It was a weapon. A secret weapon they had no idea existed. And in that moment, watching their greed and disbelief curdle their faces, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The game had just changed. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding all the cards. The drive home from the lawyer's office was a blur. $18 million. The number echoed in the silence of my car, sounding more like a weapon than a comfort. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the shock my family displayed wasn't just about the money, it was about the power. Power that had just been handed to the wrong person, to the one they had always controlled through neglect. For about 48 hours, there was silence, a tense, unnatural quiet. I half expected them to show up at my apartment demanding answers, but they didn't. They were smarter than that. They were strategizing. And then, the calls began. It started with my mother. Her tone was sickly sweet, dripping with a concern I hadn't heard since I was a child with a fever. "Sarah, honey," she began, "I'm just calling to check on you. It must be so overwhelming. All those responsibilities." She let the word hang in the air. "Have you had a chance to walk through Aunt Carol's house yet? I just can't stop thinking about all the memories there." She wasn't asking about my memories. She was scouting the asset. A few days later, she called again. Honey, I was just talking to our accountant, and oh my, estate taxes can be so complicated. You'll need a very good team to navigate all that. Your father and I were thinking, perhaps we could help you find someone reliable. They weren't offering help. They were probing for control of the finances. The questions were always wrapped in the thin gauze of parental concern, but they felt like a surgeon's scalpels, carefully dissecting my new reality, looking for a way in. Then my father started calling. His approach was less subtle. He didn't bother with the fake sympathy. His calls were direct, almost businesslike. "Sarah," he said one afternoon, his voice stern, "I've been thinking about Kevin. The boy's got ideas, but he's got no capital. A man needs capital to build an empire. He can't do that living in our basement." The implication was as heavy as a sledgehammer. My brother's future was now somehow my financial responsibility. Another call, a few days after. "That house in Connecticut, it's a lot for a single woman to manage. The upkeep alone must be astronomical. It's not a practical asset for someone in your position." My position. The unspoken words were, "the daughter who doesn't deserve it." A cold dread began to settle in my gut. This wasn't a family trying to process grief or good fortune. This was a pack of wolves circling. They were testing my defenses, looking for weaknesses, coordinating their attack. The final warning sign came from Kevin himself. He sent me a text. Not a call. A text. It was a link to a glossy online brochure for a $300,000 sports car. Underneath it, just a single sentence. "Saw this and thought of my new business venture. Would be great for marketing." He wasn't even asking. He was telling me what he expected. The audacity of it, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement, made me feel sick. I knew a confrontation was coming. The quiet was over. The siege was about to begin. A week after the will reading, the summons came. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a formal declaration. My mother called and announced, "We're having a family meeting on Sunday, at our house. Be there at 6. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Walking into my parents' house felt like walking into an ambush. The air was thick with rehearsed sincerity. My father, my mother, and Kevin were all sitting in the living room, arranged like a panel of judges. I was directed to the single armchair opposite them. There was no small talk. No, "How are you doing?" Just the cold, hard focus of a corporate takedown. My father cleared his throat, assuming the role of CEO of the Miller family. "Sarah," he began, his voice laced with false gravitas. "Your mother and I have had a long talk. We've been thinking about the future of this family, about what's best for everyone." I noticed he didn't say what was best for me. He said what was best for everyone. "This inheritance, it's a great blessing, but it's also a great burden. You're a young, single woman. You don't need a massive mansion in another state, and you certainly don't have the experience to run a multi-million-dollar corporation." Every word was a carefully placed brick, building a prison of incompetence around me. He was defining my reality for me. My mother leaned forward, her face a mask of loving concern. "Honey, what your father is trying to say is that we have a plan, a fair plan." She reached out as if to take my hand, but I kept them locked in my lap. "We think the best course of action is for you to sell the house and the company. Liquidate the assets. It's the cleanest, simplest way." I just stared at her, my mind racing. Sell everything? Sell the company Aunt Carol had poured her entire life into? The home she loved? "And then what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. This was Kevin's cue. He sat up, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Well, that's the best part, sis. With that money, I can finally get my startup off the ground, and I'll get a proper house. You know, start a family. It's what Aunt Carol would have wanted, to see the family name thrive." He said it with such conviction, as if he truly believed this twisted version of reality. My aunt, who couldn't stand his laziness, would have wanted him to have her fortune. The absurdity was breathtaking. My father delivered the final blow. Exactly. So, we'll use the money to set Kevin up. And of course, we'll put a significant portion aside in a trust for your mother and me for our retirement. You, Sarah, can have a portion as well. Enough to live comfortably. It's the right thing to do. It's what a family does for each other. He leaned back, satisfied, as if he had just presented the most logical, generous proposal in the world. They weren't asking me. They were telling me. They had already divided up my life, my future, my inheritance, without even consulting me. I was just a facilitator, a bank. I was silent for a long time, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. And just when I thought the audacity couldn't possibly get any worse, my father added the finishing touch. His voice became smooth, calculating. "And think of the family's image, Sarah," he said, a strategic gleam in his eye. "We'll take a portion of the money, say 100,000 or so, and make a very public donation to that new family support charity downtown. There's a big fundraising gala next month. The four of us can attend together. We'll be on the board, maybe. It will show everyone that we're a strong, united family. It'll show that you're a good, generous daughter, using your aunt's legacy in a way that honors her memory." The room spun. The raw, naked manipulation of it all hit me like a physical blow. They wanted to strip me of my inheritance, and then use a tiny fraction of it to parade me around like a prize pony. They wanted to use the very money they were stealing from me as a prop in their disgusting play of being a perfect, charitable family. They would stand on a stage, accepting applause for their generosity, paid for with my money, while I stood in the background, the silent, smiling symbol of their success. The hypocrisy was a poison, seeping into my veins. This wasn't a plan. This was a heist, complete with a public relations campaign. They weren't just trying to rob me. They were trying to erase me, to rewrite my story, to make me an accomplice in my own destruction. And it was in that moment, looking at their expectant, greedy faces, that the last flickering ember of hope I had for my family finally died. It was extinguished completely, leaving behind nothing but cold, hard ash. And that's when I knew, after all the years of sacrifice, after all the quiet moments of being pushed aside, this was the final, unforgivable act. At this point, I don't even know what word to use to describe what they did. If you're feeling the same anger I am right now, help me out. Comment one word that describes their actions, because that anger, that profound sense of injustice, it didn't break me. Instead, it forged something new inside me, something cold and sharp and unbreakable. They thought they were closing a deal. They had no idea they had just declared war. I didn't storm out. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I simply looked at each of them, one by one. My father, beaming with patriarchal pride over his brilliant plan. My mother, already mentally decorating Kevin's new mansion, and Kevin, who looked like he had just won the lottery without ever buying a ticket. And I stood up. My movements were slow, deliberate. "I need some time to think about this," I said. My voice was unnervingly calm, a flat line in a room buzzing with their triumphant energy. The calmness seemed to confuse them more than any outburst would have. My father just nodded curtly. "Good. You do that. Think it over. You'll see it's the only logical choice." He thought he was giving me an order. He had no idea I was giving him my resignation. The drive back to my apartment was the longest drive of my life. The city lights blurred into streaks of meaningless color. I wasn't crying. The time for tears was over. Tears were a luxury you could afford when you still had hope, when you thought there was something left to save. What I felt was a profound, terrifying emptiness. It was the chilling silence after a massive explosion, when all the noise and fire had died down, and you're left standing in the rubble of what used to be your world. My entire life, I had been running on a treadmill of hope. Hope that one day, one promotion, one act of responsibility would be enough. Hope that they would finally see me. That hope had been the fuel, the engine that kept me going through lonely nights and overlooked achievements. And in that living room, they hadn't just insulted me or tried to steal from me. They had taken that engine and ripped it out of my chest, leaving a gaping, hollow void. I parked the car and just sat there in the dark, the silence of the underground garage pressing in on me. A single thought echoed in the void. It is over. Not just the conversation, not just the argument. Everything. The years of trying, the quiet yearning for a crumb of approval. The lie that we were a family. It was all over. They will never change. The thought wasn't sad. It was clarifying. Like a surgeon's knife, it cut away all the messy, sentimental tissue, leaving only the cold, hard bone of truth. And if they were never going to change, then I had to. The Sarah who endured, the Sarah who hoped, the Sarah who made excuses for them. She died in that living room tonight. Someone else had to take her place. I walked into my apartment and locked the door behind me. The deadbolt sliding into place sounded like the cocking of a gun. The first thing I did was walk to my window and look out at the sprawling city. It was a world I had built for myself, a life I had carved out with my own two hands, entirely separate from them. They had no idea who I had become. They still saw the quiet 16-year-old who cried when she failed her driving test. They were about to meet the woman who ran international marketing campaigns. The fight-or-flight response that had been churning in my gut for an hour finally settled, and what was left was pure, unadulterated fight. The pain was still there, a deep, tectonic ache. But it was no longer a weakness. It was transforming into something else. It was becoming fuel. I didn't sleep. Instead, I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled out a simple, elegant wooden box. Aunt Carol had given it to me on my 21st birthday. She had said, "Don't open this unless you absolutely have to. Unless they give you no other choice." My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not jewelry or old letters. It was a thick, leather-bound file. On the front, in my aunt's precise, no-nonsense handwriting, was a single word: Winters. My family name. My stomach tightened into a knot. This was it. This was the contingency plan. This was the proof that Aunt Carol had known this day might come. She had seen them for who they were long before I was willing to. I sat down at my desk, took a deep breath, and made my first call. It was just after 10 p.m., but I knew he'd answer. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady. "It's Sarah Miller. I'm sorry to call so late." There was a pause on the other end, and then his calm, reassuring voice filled the line. "I was expecting your call, Sarah. Tell me what happened." I recounted the entire meeting, every word, every calculated glance. I told him their plan to liquidate the assets, to fund Kevin's life, to use me as a prop at a charity gala. I expected him to be shocked. He wasn't. All he said was, "I see. And did your aunt happen to leave you a small wooden box?" "Yes," I said, my hand resting on the leather file. "I'm looking at it right now." "Good," he replied. "Then it's time to get to work. Open the file, Sarah. Read every page. Call me back when you're done. We have a lot to prepare before the next meeting." I hung up the phone and opened the file. The first page was a letter from Aunt Carol. "My dearest Sarah," it began. "If you are reading this, it means your father has finally shown his true colors. I am so sorry. I am sorry for every time I stayed silent, hoping he would change. I am sorry for not protecting you from him sooner. But I did not leave you defenseless. This file is your defense. It is the truth. Use it wisely. My eyes filled with tears, but these were different tears. Not of pain, but of a fierce, protective love from beyond the grave. For the next 4 hours, I read. And with every page I turned, the last vestiges of the dutiful daughter burned away, replaced by the cold fury of a woman who had been wronged. The file was a meticulous, devastating record of my family's financial and moral bankruptcy, compiled by a private investigator Aunt Carol had kept on retainer for over a decade. There were bank statements showing large, unexplained cash withdrawals from my parents' accounts that coincided with trips to Las Vegas. There were copies of desperate, pleading emails from my father to Aunt Carol, begging for loans to cover his business losses. Losses he never had. There were recordings of phone calls. My mother's voice, crying crocodile tears, telling Aunt Carol that Kevin was at risk of being evicted and needed just $5,000 to tide him over. A lie. A complete lie. Kevin was living rent-free in their basement. But the worst part? The part that made me feel like I was going to be physically sick, was a section at the back. It detailed a legal inquiry from 5 years prior. The investigator had uncovered an attempt by my parents to claim the estate of a distant relative in Colorado. A man they had met maybe twice. Their legal argument? That their son Kevin was the rightful heir because he needed the resources more than the deceased man's actual children. It was their playbook, their modus operandi. They were predators, and their own children were just tools in their disgusting lifelong con. I was just the biggest score they had ever come across. I closed the file, the leather cool beneath my trembling fingers. The emptiness inside me was gone. It had been filled with something hard and unyielding. It was the truth. And the truth was my weapon. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Vance back. It was nearly 3 a.m. "I've read it," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "I've read it all." "And?" he asked gently. "And," I said, looking at the city lights that no longer seemed meaningless, but like a kingdom I now had to defend. "I'm ready. I want you to draw up the papers. All of them. The ones we discussed as a hypothetical. The ones for the house. The ones for the company. The ones for the trust. And I want you to be there for the next family meeting. Because this time, it won't be a negotiation. It will be an announcement. There would be no more discussion, no more pleading, no more hope. Just the cold, hard, and very expensive consequences of their actions. They wanted a war. They had no idea I was about to show up with an army. An army Aunt Carol had built for me, one devastating piece of evidence at a time. The week that followed our last family meeting was one of the strangest of my life. On the surface, it was business as usual. I went to work, led my meetings, and continued planning the European expansion. But beneath that calm exterior, I was a general preparing for battle. Every evening was spent on the phone with Arthur Vance and a team of financial advisors he had assembled. We were moving chess pieces around a board that my family didn't even know existed. We restructured the company, set up impenetrable trusts, and prepared legal documents that were as precise and deadly as surgical instruments. My family, meanwhile, seemed to be interpreting my silence as submission. They gave me my space to think, as my mother so generously put it in a text message. They were confident. They believed they had won. They believed their dutiful daughter was finally falling in line, ready to accept her designated role as the family ATM. The summons for the second meeting came exactly 1 week later. It was my father who called. His tone was breezy, confident. "Sarah," he said, "we're all getting together for dinner at the house on Saturday, just to finalize our family plan. Be here at 7. Finalize our plan, not my plan." He didn't even think to ask if I was free. He just assumed I would clear my schedule for them. The old Sarah would have. The old Sarah would have dutifully shown up, heart pounding with anxiety, ready to be disappointed one more time. But the woman who drove to her parents' house that Saturday evening was not the old Sarah. The woman who walked up that driveway felt no anxiety, only a cold, crystalline focus. I wasn't walking into an ambush anymore. I was the ambush. When I walked in, the scene was set for a victory celebration. My mother had cooked a roast, and the good china was out. Kevin was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through luxury car listings on his phone. He barely looked up when I entered. My father greeted me at the door with a self-satisfied smile, patting me on the shoulder like a disobedient dog who had finally learned to heel. "Glad you came to your senses, kiddo," he said. They sat me down at the dining table, the seat of honor, the place where the sacrifice was to be made. They didn't even wait for the food to be served. They were too eager to claim their prize. My father sat at the head of the table, placing his hands together like a king about to issue a decree. "So, Sarah," he began, his voice booming with authority, "have you contacted a real estate agent about the Connecticut property yet? We need to get the ball rolling on this. Time is money." My mother chimed in, her voice light and airy. "And, have you thought about which charity we should support? I saw that the gala for the Children's Hope Foundation is next month. It would be perfect for us." They spoke as if my compliance was a foregone conclusion, as if the last week had been nothing more than a formality. They had no idea what I had been doing. They had no idea who was about to walk through their front door. I took a slow sip of water, letting the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. I placed the glass down gently. "Actually," I said, my voice calm and even, "I haven't spoken to a real estate agent." My father's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "But I have been speaking at length with my lawyer." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. My mother looked confused. "Are we expecting someone else?" she asked. "Yes," I said, looking directly at my father. "I am." I stood up and walked to the door. Standing on the porch, holding a handsome leather briefcase, was Arthur Vance. I opened the door wide. "Mr. Vance, thank you for coming. Please, join us." The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out. My father's face went pale. My mother looked utterly bewildered. Kevin finally put his phone down, a look of confusion on his face. Arthur Vance walked in, exuding an aura of calm, professional power that made my father's blustering authority look cheap and theatrical. "Frank, Linda, Kevin," he said, nodding to each of them in turn. He didn't offer to shake their hands. He placed his briefcase on the dining table with a soft but definitive click. "Sarah asked me to be present for this conversation," he said. "She felt it was best to have legal counsel here to ensure everything is clear." My father puffed out his chest, trying to regain control. "This is a private family matter, Vance. We don't need lawyers involved." Arthur Vance simply smiled, a thin, humorless smile. "On the contrary, Frank," he said, opening his briefcase. "When the matter involves the execution of an $18 million estate, it is entirely a legal matter." He pulled out a file, the one Aunt Carol had labeled Winters. He placed it on the table between us. "Before we discuss any plans for Carol's assets," Mr. Vance said, his voice dropping a decibel, becoming colder, "I believe it's important to review some past financial history." He slid a document across the table. It was a copy of an email from my father to Aunt Carol, dated 7 years ago. A desperate plea for $50,000 to cover a bad investment. Carol's private investigator, Mr. Vance explained, confirmed that this bad investment was actually a series of losses at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. My father stared at the paper, his face turning a blotchy red. My mother gasped. Mr. Vance continued, relentless. He produced another document, a transcript of a phone call. My mother's voice crying to Aunt Carol about Kevin needing money for a medical emergency. An emergency, the investigator confirmed, was actually for a down payment on a sports car he couldn't afford. Page after page, the truth came out. A decade of lies, manipulation, and attempted extortion, all meticulously documented. And then, Mr. Vance delivered the next blow. "And this is perhaps the most troubling," he said, pulling out a separate, thinner file. The investigator also uncovered a pattern of behavior. It seems that 5 years ago, you, Fra, and Linda filed a legal claim against the estate of a distant cousin in Colorado. You argued that your son, Kevin, was the more deserving heir. Your claim was, of course, dismissed as frivolous. He looked at them, his eyes like chips of ice. It would seem that trying to divert inheritances to Kevin is not a new strategy for this family. My mother started to sob quietly. My father looked like he had been punched in the stomach. Kevin just stared, his mouth hanging open, finally understanding that this was not a game. This was the moment. The air was thick with their shame and shock. I let the silence hang for a beat, and then I spoke. I looked at all of them, my voice completely steady, completely devoid of the emotion they had always used against me. "I've had a week to think," I began, "and you were right about one thing." They all looked up, a flicker of hope in their eyes. "You were right that Kevin needs a house. A man needs a place of his own to build his future. You are absolutely right about that." A slow, relieved smile spread across my father's face. Kevin sat up straighter. "Sarah, I knew you'd do the right thing," my father said, his voice full of false warmth. "I knew you'd see reason." I held his gaze. "I'm glad you think so," I said, "because I agree. That's why I've instructed Mr. Vance to begin the legal process of transferring the full, unencumbered title of Aunt Carol's 18,000-square-foot Victorian mansion in Connecticut directly to Kevin." The room fell silent again. Kevin's eyes went wide with disbelief, then pure, ecstatic joy. Are you serious?" he stammered. "The whole house? It's mine?" My mother clasped her hands together, tears of happiness now streaming down her face. "Oh, Sarah, I knew you had a good heart." I let them enjoy their victory for a full 5 seconds, and then I dropped the bomb. "Yes, Kevin," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "The house is all yours. There's just one small detail you need to be aware of. According to federal and state tax law, when a property of that value is gifted, the recipient is immediately liable for the associated gift and property taxes. Mr. Vance has calculated the initial payment due to the IRS and the state of Connecticut to be roughly $750,000, due within 90 days of the transfer." I paused, looking at my brother's euphoric expression beginning to curdle. "And since the other $17+ million of the estate are locked in an ironclad trust of which I am the sole beneficiary, I guess you'll have to figure out how to come up with that on your own." I picked up my water glass again. "Good luck with your new house, brother." The silence that followed my announcement was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the smug satisfaction, out of the room. I watched the emotional chain reaction unfold in slow motion, like watching a car crash from a safe distance. First came the shock. Pure, uncomprehending shock. Kevin's face, which had been glowing with the ecstasy of a lottery winner, collapsed. The color drained from his cheeks. His jaw went slack, and his eyes darted from me to Mr. Vance and back again, searching for the punchline. He looked like a child who had just been told Santa Claus wasn't real. My mother's happy tears froze on her face. Her hands, which had been clasped in prayer-like gratitude, fell limply into her lap. She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish out of water. Then came the denial. My father was the first to find his voice, and when he did, it was laced with a desperate, sputtering disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he barked, his eyes wide. $750,000? That's ridiculous. This is a joke, right? A sick, twisted joke. He looked at Mr. Vance, expecting him to crack a smile and admit it was all a prank. But Arthur Vance's expression was as immovable as granite. "I assure you, Frank," he said, his voice calm and deadly, "the IRS does not have a sense of humor." And finally came the panic. The cold, hard reality of the numbers began to sink in, and with it, a tidal wave of pure animal panic. Kevin was the first to break. 700,000? He stammered, the words barely audible. I don't have that. I don't have $700. The facade of the brilliant entrepreneur, the golden boy with big ideas, shattered in an instant, revealing the terrified, incompetent man-child underneath. He looked at my parents, his eyes begging for them to fix this, just like they had fixed everything else in his entire life. But they couldn't fix this. And the realization hit them like a physical blow. My mother let out a wail, a sound of genuine anguish. "Sarah, how could you?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "How could you do this to your brother? You're destroying him. You're destroying his future." The blame, swift and reflexive, was already being shifted. It wasn't their greed that had caused this. It was my cruelty. My father slammed his fist on the dining table, making the good china rattle. "This is unacceptable," he roared, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "You will reverse this. You will call your lawyer and you will fix this right now." He was still giving orders. He still thought he was in charge. He hadn't yet understood that the entire power structure of our family had just been demolished. Mr. Vance and I stood up in unison. There was nothing more to say. "My client has made her intentions clear," Mr. Vance said, placing the files back into his briefcase with a final, definitive click. "The gift of the property to Kevin is irrevocable. The tax liability is his alone. If you have any further questions, you can direct them to my office." I didn't look at them as we walked out. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of their rage, the chilling cold of their panic, on my back. We closed the door behind us, leaving them alone in the ruins of their perfect, greedy plan. The drive home was silent, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the calm after the storm, the quiet satisfaction of a long and difficult battle finally won. Before I got out of the car, Mr. Vance turned to me. "Your aunt would have been incredibly proud of you tonight, Sarah," he said, a rare warmth in his eyes. "You did exactly what she hoped you would have the strength to do." The digital assault began before I even had the key in my apartment door. My phone buzzed, a frantic, desperate vibration. It was my mother. I ignored it. It buzzed again. My father. Ignored. Then a text from Kevin. A string of incoherent, panicked words. I walked into my apartment and placed my phone on the kitchen counter, face down. I didn't want to see their names. I didn't want to hear their voices. But I knew this was just the beginning. Over the next few hours, my phone became a weapon they tried to use against me. It buzzed and pinged relentlessly. A constant, hysterical barrage of calls and texts. They were trying to break through my silence, to drag me back into their chaos. I let them. I let every call go to voicemail, every text go unread. Sometime after midnight, curiosity got the better of me. I turned my phone over and saw the notifications. 27 missed calls, 53 text messages, and 3 voicemails. I took a deep breath and pressed play on the first one. It was from my father. His voice was no longer booming with authority. It was a low, guttural snarl, filled with an almost reptilian venom. "You ungrateful little brat. the message began. You think you're so clever, don't you? You've destroyed this family. All of it. Everything we worked for, everything we planned was ruined because of your selfishness and your jealousy. You were always jealous of your brother, weren't you? Well, I hope you're happy now, alone with all that money. It will never buy you a family. You've made sure of that. He hung up. The blame, the projection. It was so predictable, so textbook. It didn't even hurt. It was just pathetic. The next voicemail was from my mother. Her voice was thick with tears, a masterful performance of maternal anguish. Sarah, honey, it's Mommy, she sobbed. I don't understand how you could be so cruel, after everything I've done for you, for both of you. I sacrificed my life to raise you children. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? By tearing your brother's life apart? By turning your back on your own family? My heart is broken, Sarah. Completely broken. The emotional blackmail. The guilt trip. Another classic from her playbook. It was designed to make me feel like a monster, to make me doubt myself. But the words just washed over me. They were just noise now. I saved Kevin's for last. I knew it would be different. And it was. His voice wasn't angry or sad. It was just terrified. Sarah, please, he pleaded, his voice small and shaky. Please, pick up the phone. I don't know what to do. The lawyer. He said they could put a lien on the house. They could take it. Sarah, you have to fix this. You have to. Just pay the taxes for me. Please. You have all that money. It's nothing to you. Please, Sarah. Don't let them do this to me. It was the raw, unfiltered plea of a man who had never once in his life had to face a single consequence for his actions. And in that moment, I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. But pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. The final act of their desperation came the next afternoon. A frantic pounding on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole. It was Kevin. His hair was a mess. His eyes were red and wild. He looked like he hadn't slept. Sarah, I know you're in there. Open the door, he yelled, his voice echoing in the hallway. We need to talk. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. Sarah, please, he begged, his voice breaking. Dad's talking about selling the house. Mom won't stop crying. You're tearing us apart. Just tell them you made a mistake. We can go back to the original plan. I'll even let you keep a bigger piece. We can negotiate. Negotiate. He still thought this was a negotiation. He still thought he had something to offer me. I stood there, my hand on the deadbolt, listening to him beg and bargain with the ghost of the sister he thought he knew. He stayed there for almost an hour, his pleas eventually turning into angry, frustrated sobs before he finally gave up. As I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall, I felt a profound sense of finality. This was the end. The final desperate attempt to pull me back into their dysfunctional orbit had failed. They had tried every tool in their arsenal. Rage, guilt, fear, and now pathetic bargaining. And none of it had worked. Because the person they were trying to manipulate didn't exist anymore. She was gone, and the woman who stood in her place was finally, completely, and irrevocably free. After Kevin finally left my doorstep, I stood in the silence of my apartment, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt clean. It was a blank slate. The chaos, the guilt, the constant draining hum of their expectations. It was all gone, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. I knew the barrage wouldn't stop. They would keep trying, keep clawing at the walls I had just built. I knew I needed to make one final definitive statement, a declaration of independence. I picked up my phone, my hand perfectly steady, and opened my email. I composed a message to my parents. It was short, concise, and devoid of all emotion. It wasn't a letter from a daughter. It was a legal notice. The email read, "Frank and Linda. This is to inform you that all future communication regarding myself, my finances, or the estate of Carol Hughes must be directed to my legal counsel, Arthur Vance. His contact information is attached. Any attempt to contact me directly via phone, text, email, or in person will be documented and forwarded to him. I will no longer be responding to you. This is not a negotiation. This is a final boundary. Sarah." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. And then, one by one, I opened their contacts and pressed the block button. My father. Blocked. My mother. Blocked. My brother. Blocked. With each tap of the screen, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. It was like severing anchor lines that had been holding me underwater my entire life. I was finally surfacing. I was finally free to breathe. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to their drama. I was setting the terms of my own peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't backing down. I was choosing myself over their comfort. This was a massive turning point for me. If you support this powerful decision, drop a flexed bicep emoji in the comments to send some strength her way on this new journey. That strength, even just the idea of it, was exactly what I needed to start rebuilding my life. And in the quiet that followed, something amazing happened. As the toxic voices of my biological family faded into silence, I began to hear the other voices, the ones that had been there all along, patiently waiting in the wings. I realized that while I had been so focused on the family I was born into, I had unknowingly been building another one, a better one, a family of my own choosing. That evening, my best friend, Jessica, showed up at my door. She didn't call first. She just appeared, holding 2 large bags of takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine. She didn't ask me what happened. She didn't need to. She just saw the exhaustion in my eyes, walked in, and started setting the table. We ate in comfortable silence, and for the first time in days, I actually tasted my food. She didn't offer advice or platitudes. She just offered her presence, her unwavering, unconditional presence, and that was more healing than any words could ever be. She was my family. The next morning, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. It was my boss, Mr. Davison. "Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Arthur Vance called me. He gave me the broad strokes. I just wanted to say, don't even think about work right now. Your team has it covered. Take a week. Take 2. Take as long as you need. The European expansion will be waiting for you when you get back. Your job is secure. Just focus on yourself." I was stunned. In my old family, a crisis was a burden you were expected to hide, to work through without complaint. But here was my boss, a man who paid me for my performance, showing me more genuine compassion and respect than my own father ever had. He was my family. And then, there was Arthur Vance. He called me later that day, not as a lawyer, but as a friend, as the protector my aunt had entrusted me to. "How are you holding up, kid?" he asked, his formal tone gone. I told him about the voicemails, about Kevin showing up at my door. He listened patiently. "They're panicking, Sarah," he said. "They've lost control, and it's making them act like cornered animals. Just hold the line, it will get easier. And remember," he added, his voice softening, "Carol didn't just leave you her money. She left you her strength. It's in you. It always has been." He wasn't just my lawyer. He was a link to my aunt, a guardian. He was my family. I began to see it everywhere. The friendly nod from my neighbor in the hallway. The barista at my local coffee shop always remembered my order. The colleagues who sent supportive, no questions asked emails. These were the people who populated my real life, the people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. They were a quiet network of support, a chosen family built on mutual respect and genuine kindness, not on obligation or blood. The revelation was profound. All my life, I had been staring at a locked door, begging for the people inside to love me, completely blind to the fact that there was a beautiful, thriving garden all around me, filled with people who already did. My biological family had demanded my loyalty, my time, my resources, and my emotional energy, all while giving nothing in return. My chosen family, they demanded nothing. And yet, they gave me everything. Respect, support, peace. The contrast was stark, and it was liberating. The pain of my family's betrayal was still there, a dull, persistent ache. But it was no longer the defining feature of my world. It was just a scar, a reminder of a battle I had fought and won. Now it was time to focus on the peace. It was time to invest in the people who invested in me. It was time to finally, truly come home. It's been 6 months since that final explosive dinner. 6 months since I blocked their numbers and severed the ties that had been slowly strangling me for 28 years. I took the promotion. I moved to the West Coast. My apartment is a modern penthouse in Los Angeles, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the Pacific Ocean. Every morning, I watch the sunrise paint the sky, and it feels like I'm seeing color for the first time. The air here is different. It's lighter, just like me. I'm running the new West Coast division of my company, and it's thriving. But that's not the work I'm most proud of. Using a portion of Aunt Carol's estate, I established the Carol Hughes Foundation. It's a nonprofit dedicated to providing scholarships and mentorship to talented, ambitious young people who lack family support. Every time I meet one of these incredible kids, I see a reflection of myself. And I make sure they know what Aunt Carol taught me, that their value is not determined by the family they were born into. I don't seek out news about my old family, but sometimes, news has a way of finding you. Arthur Vance and I still talk regularly, and during one of our calls, he filled me in on the fallout. Just as he predicted, Kevin couldn't come up with the $750,000. The tax lien on the Connecticut property became a massive legal problem. To avoid further legal action and a potential forced sale by the IRS, my parents had to do the unthinkable. They had to sell their own house, the very home where they had raised their golden child, to bail him out. According to Mr. Vance, they now live in a small rented condo. And Kevin, well, Kevin finally has a job. He works for a logistics company, loading and unloading trucks. For the first time in his 30 years of life, he's having to earn a paycheck. I don't feel happy about their misfortune, but I don't feel sad either. I just feel detached. They are the architects of their own consequences. About a month ago, a letter arrived at my new office. It had been forwarded by Mr. Vance. The handwriting on the envelope was messy, unfamiliar. It was from Kevin. I almost threw it away, but something made me open it. It wasn't a plea for money. It wasn't a demand or a complaint. It was just 2 pages, written in a simple, almost childlike script. He apologized. Genuinely. He wrote that losing everything had forced him to see himself for the first time, and he didn't like what he saw. He admitted to his entitlement, his laziness, and his selfishness. He said he was sorry for every time he took what should have been mine. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just said he hoped that one day he could become a man his aunt would have been proud of. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat down at my computer and wrote a short reply. "Thank you for your letter, Kevin," I typed. "I wish you all the best." I hit send. The door to a future relationship isn't completely closed. But if we ever do have one, It will be on a foundation of respect, a foundation that he, for the first time, is being forced to build for himself. Tonight, I'm standing on my balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, turning the ocean into a sheet of liquid gold. For so many years, my world was small. It was defined by the four walls of my family's expectations, and I spent all my energy trying to earn a key to a door that was never meant to open for me. I thought that family was a bond of blood, an obligation you were born with. I was wrong. Aunt Carol's greatest gift to me wasn't the $18 million. It was the permission slip she gave me to define my own worth. She taught me that true family isn't about blood. It's about respect. It's about investment. Family is the people who show up, who lift you, and who celebrate your victories as if they were their own. The people who choose you, and whom you choose, in return. My story had a fortunate ending, but I know for so many people, the battle is still ongoing. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with a family member who took you for granted? How did you navigate that painful conversation? Let me know your story in the comments below, because your experience could be the lifeline someone else needs to hear. And if my journey resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding your voice. And finally, if you know someone who is struggling to break free, someone who might feel a little less alone after hearing this, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening.